You idiots. You morons. You imbeciles. Kamala Harris? Really? That's who you threw up there?
There are so many loony left-wing people on the internet, but this leftist YouTuber actually kind of gets it. We're gonna break down a viral video from the left-wing YouTuber ShoeOnHead and so much more in today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where I take on the craziest ideas from across our politics, media, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. First, welcome back to the show and hope you all had a great Thanksgiving. I'm back and ready to get going again with some content, just a few pounds heavier and a couple pies down. Now for our main topic today, we're gonna break down some highlights from a video that's doing the rounds and getting millions of views by the left-wing political YouTuber ShoeOnHead, with whom I disagree about almost everything, but I actually thought she had some really fascinating insights into why Democrats lost so horribly in the election and why left-wing politics are just struggling and faltering in America right now. She's also just really funny.
My home state, New York, was closer to flipping red than Florida was to flipping blue. Turns out Dick Cheney as Brat wasn't the best message to win over voters. Dems did so bad it really had me thinking, damn, did we steal that election?
You see, ShoeOnHead is very much a Bernie Sanders style progressive, a left-winger, but she jokes about stuff and she isn't politically correct. She doesn't get triggered. In fact, she thinks it's funny to laugh about very serious things, and she's just eminently more interesting and relatable than a lot of the hypersensitive liberal political commentators you'll find on the internet. She's also not a loyalist to the DNC, so she's willing to speak about her own side with a frankly refreshing degree of honesty, like she did in this clip about the Harris-Walz campaign.
You idiots. You morons. You imbeciles. Kamala Harris? Really? That's who you threw up there? The one who dropped out before Iowa? The one who got blown the f*** out by Tulsi Gabbard? Why didn't you hold a primary? Aren't you the f***ing saviors of democracy? Where the f*** was the democracy? Oh, big congratulations to Tim Walz on being the first white male DEI hire. It didn't f***ing work. The DNC completely neutered that guy, reduced him to this weird token white man. Hello, fellow men, I too play football. But hey, men weren't the only demographic you completely dropped the ball with. Trump made incredible gains with women, too. Oh, and all those never-Trumpers you tried to court, the people who like the old, respectable GOP? You know, the old, respectable GOP that led us into a pointless war that cost us trillions of dollars and millions of lives. But we're at least nice on Twitter. That GOP. Yeah, they didn't come out and vote for your ass either. So you got Liz Cheney to tag along for what? For f***ing what?
I'm sorry, but she's spitting facts! Kamala was always an incredibly bad candidate, but once they gave her the nomination in, yes, a very undemocratic process, ironically for the Democratic Party, who spent years talking about how much they stand for democracy, they acted like she was actually great, and like all of recent history didn't happen. Like Kamala didn't run for president in 2020 and bomb and fail terribly. Like she hadn't committed so many gaffes and errors, and she wasn't a historically unpopular vice president. Like she didn't cackle randomly like a hyena at unpredictable and inappropriate times. They just tried to wipe the memory board clean and start again as if, oh, she's this profound political talent, but we all knew that wasn't true. And I laugh when she said that Tim Walz was the first white dude DEI hire, because they really did just pick a white guy who they thought was like normal and could appeal to men and then tell him like, do men things, talk about football. Like they put out all these ads calling him coach, and look, he did coach high school football for a few years, but that was literally decades ago. It ended in 2002. So going around calling him coach is just weird, and it obviously came off as incredibly manufactured and inauthentic, which is a huge part of Democrats' problems as far as the Democratic establishment is concerned. They come off as incredibly slimy and fake and inauthentic, and Trump, you can say a lot of things about him, but he is authentic for sure. And it's absolutely true, as ShoeOnHead notes, that the Kamala Harris strategy of appealing to moderate Republicans, by which she really means like these ultra hawkish neoconservative Liz Cheney types, didn't work because it's not like there was a significant base in 2024 of Republicans who still love Liz Cheney that you could appeal to, and it only further alienated her actual progressive supporters that she was palling around with like people who still simp for the Iraq war. And it all actually played into Trump's hands because he could point to Kamala and Liz Cheney campaigning together and say, look, both sides of the establishment are against me. That's how you know I'm fighting for you. And it really did kind of suit him that she took this approach. It was all just a political disaster class. The Democratic strategists behind the Kamala Harris campaign should go down in history for how not to do their jobs. We're going to get into so much more, but first let's pause and take a quick break to hear from today's sponsor. So you guys know it's been really hard for me over the last couple months since my dog Reggie passed away. Well, I decided that I wanted to start donating to animal rights advocacy in his memory, which is why I'm so glad I'm partnered with today's sponsor, Bono. Donating to charity can feel really overwhelming. Who do I donate to? What impact is my money having? That's where Bono comes in. It's an amazing new, easy, smart, and transparent digital service that helps you donate with no service fee to the causes you care about and gives you impact updates in a social media style feed. You just choose a cause to help solve, set up a monthly donation plan starting from $5, and that's it. Plus, all your donations are in one easily manageable location. Decide when you want to donate more or less, and all your tax-deductible receipts are available in one place no matter how many charities you're giving to. In 2 weeks, I'm going to do an update and see how many meals for the hungry, how many farm animals rescued, and how many meals for veterans' families we've been able to fundraise for as the Brad vs. Everyone community. So click the link in the description or use the QR code on screen plus my promo code BRAD to receive $5 towards your first donation with Bono, but only for the first 50 people that go ahead and take advantage of it. And once you set up your profile, you'll get $5 to send to a friend for their first donation. There's no better time to start giving than with Giving Tuesday coming up this Tuesday, so check out Bono today. You'll be glad you did. It was also something of a financial and economic calamity, as ShoeOnHead went on to point out.
You raised $1 billion and ended up $20 million in debt? Where the hell did all that money go? Maybe you should have blown it all on celebrity appearances that did nothing. Or maybe it was spending 6 figures on a single-use set for the Call Her Daddy podcast that didn't even hit 1 million views. I want to see a full audit of this campaign, because I wouldn't be surprised if this was all like a big money laundering scheme, because honestly, that makes more sense than this being a legitimate presidential campaign. Then, they had the audacity to beg their supporters for money after she lost. How about you? How about every DNC consultant should have this map sewn onto the inside of their eyelids? May they never have a peaceful wink of sleep for the rest of their miserable lives.
Wow, she's really quite something. I can see why she's popular and people like tuning into her videos, but the point here she raises is a completely valid one. Despite all their years of complaining about money in politics and accusing Republicans of buying elections through billionaires and all this stuff, which sometimes has a grain of truth to it, but is often overwrought and hyperbolic, Democrats massively outraised Republicans this election cycle. Kamala had way more cash on hand in her campaign than Trump did, massively outspent him, yet still lost horribly. There should be a comprehensive audit and serious introspection into how that money was spent. Now, some of the celebrity stuff looks bad in hindsight, but it's ultimately kind of small ticket as a percentage of the total budget. But I think it's more that it sends a message about the approach the campaign probably took across the board. It's not that wasting $100,000 on a podcast set doesn't make the difference when you're talking about spending $1 billion. Of course not. That is a rounding error, but it does tell you something about the fiscal approach of the campaign that probably bled through to many things they did. So I imagine that as more information comes out about how they spent their money, it will look worse and worse and worse for the Harris campaign. And Democratic supporters and voters have every right to feel aggrieved about that. And I completely understand ShoeOnHead's frustration that now they're asking for money still after they lost. Yeah, I too would tell them to loudly F off. But then again, I wouldn't give any of these people my money in the first place. I also find Trump's fundraising texts, which they send me even though I've never ever donated to him, incredibly annoying and like kind of unhinged sometimes. Political fundraising just broadly is an absolute shit show. And if you have extra money to give, there are so many better places to give it. Now, my favorite part of the ShoeOnHead video was where she absolutely savaged a widespread liberal media talking point we're hearing right now, which is something to the effect of, the left needs their own Joe Rogan. Shue pointed out how absurd it is to make this claim. Take a listen.
Oh my god, we need a liberal Joe Rogan. You had a liberal Joe Rogan. His name was Joe Rogan. But he was too edgy, too problematic, said too many no-no words, talked to too many no-no people about no-no topics, and in 2020, when Bernie Sanders went on his podcast and Joe endorsed him, the Democrat journalist class freaked the out and smeared him for weeks. The left can't have a Joe Rogan, because everything that makes Joe Rogan, is not allowed on the left. Kamala Harris ditched Joe Rogan podcast interview over progressive backlash fears. So Joe Rogan was too problematic? But Liz Cheney was fine? Listen, you don't need a leftist Joe Rogan or liberal Joe Rogan. You just need leftists and liberals to go on Joe Rogan. And that means not giving a shit about being canceled by your own movement.
Yeah, she's exactly right here. And I don't know that it would have made the difference, but it will go down in infamy as one of the biggest campaign cell phones of all time that Kamala Harris was extended the invitation to do the full 3-hour sit down on Joe Rogan and declined. In part because it's been reported of fears that her progressive young staff would get mad at her because Joe Rogan is too problematic. That's it. That's it in the nutshell. Everything that's wrong with the Democratic Party, passing up the chance to speak to the modern-day Walter Cronkite with an audience bigger than all the cable news stations combined because some woke they-thems on your staff might have their fifis hurt because he sometimes talks to people who say things that hurt their feelings. This is pitiful political thinking and strategy. And yes, it is true. Joe Rogan was originally a Bernie bro. He was very much of the left. He was a liberal, but because he pushed back on some of the crazier trans activism and because he talked to people with different opinions, the far left viciously turned on him. They repeatedly tried to revolt and get him canceled and deplatformed at Spotify and so much more. And guess what? He ultimately ended up endorsing Trump and moving over towards the Republican side, though he's still an independent thinker in many ways, because one side hates him and attacked him. So y'all are now saying, well, if we only had our own liberal Joe Rogan, you literally did, and you scared him away. As we've covered extensively on this show, some of the establishment class seems to be using the old excuses, sexism, racism, blah, 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 and just learning the wrong lessons from this election. But some people, like ShoeOnHead, do actually have at least something of a correct interpretation of the state of current American politics and how a Democratic Party could succeed. If they ran an economically populist, culturally moderate, and not insufferably woke candidate, they would be an electoral force to be reckoned with. Now, I would still disagree with them on most policy issues. I think a lot of the populist policies that appeal to voters sound great in theory, but in practice are deeply harmful. But just on a political messaging point, Shue's diagnosis of the Democrats is entirely correct. A lot of normies in the comments do seem to get it, and her video is going viral online. But will the Democratic political class and fundraisers and strategists actually change? I highly doubt it. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below. Do hit that like button and make sure you're subscribed. Remember, I do read the comments, so please do take the time to leave your thoughts. And if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on Monday's show. And now it's time for Brad versus TikTok, my daily segment where I take on the craziest ideas from the Clock app.
Pronoun of the day is slugs.
Today, this TikToker wants to cancel and abolish Thanksgiving, and her argument is absolutely insane.
Thanksgiving is not a holiday that should be celebrated. Just like y'all be getting so mad about Columbus Day and we abolish that piece of shit day, we need to be abolishing this piece of shit day.
That's not the bar you think it is, babe, because a lot of people think the cancellation of Columbus Day was also kind of dumb and pointless. But Thanksgiving is way more cherished and meaningful to a lot of people than Columbus Day ever was. Most Americans think it's a beautiful celebration of family and gratitude, not a piece of shit day. But keep going off, I guess.
Thanksgiving is a celebration of a genocide of indigenous people and should not be celebrated by nobody.
Fact check. False. First, all across the country, nobody is getting together and celebrating Thanksgiving in order to celebrate genocide. That's not a thing. That's not what Thanksgiving means to any of the people that celebrate it. And as for the historical context, this is also not true. Lots of terrible things were absolutely done to the native and indigenous populations in America during the colonial era. But the actual historical antecedent for Thanksgiving was not an incident of mass slaughter, but an incident of cooperation. That years later, yes, bad things would happen, but it's the good part that was originally being celebrated. Now, there is this alternative historical wormhole that some of these far left types go down, where they find the first use of the term Thanksgiving in the colonial record was by a lord who declared a day of Thanksgiving after slaughter of a local tribe. But this was not Thanksgiving. That's not what inspired Thanksgiving. It was a day of Thanksgiving, which was declared many times per year. It was a thing that was done back then, but it didn't become Thanksgiving as we know it. That's not what Thanksgiving as we know it originates from. It's pseudo-history. But something tells me none of those pesky facts, which I was able to read about using a pretty quick Google search, are top of mind for this TikTok influencer.
And anybody that wants to say, oh, it's just a day for us to get together with our family, you could pick another day. You could pick another name, you could pick another ritual, okay? This is considered a national day of mourning for the indigenous people, because the true history of Thanksgiving, according to the Wampanoag and Pequot tribes, and what they celebrated on this feast and how it all went down, is the celebration of genocide, the celebration of enslaved people, of the taking of land, of rape, enslavement, torture, of wiping out and stealing from these tribes, taking everything from them, and then murdering and massacring multiple tribes across this country.
So again, it's just not true that that's what historically Thanksgiving derives from. And I'll point out that while there was countless atrocities committed against the native peoples, the vast majority of deaths during the colonial era of indigenous people were caused by the spread of diseases, which was sometimes done purposefully, but just a lot of that death was going to happen, unfortunately, tragically, because the colonial and settlers and Europeans brought diseases with them that the native population had no immunity for. That doesn't negate the many atrocities that were committed, but it's important historical context to understand. And let's just talk about this for a minute. What if Thanksgiving actually was originated back to some date where they were celebrating a slaughter? That's not the case, but what if it was? Well, if the actual holiday in its modern form had nothing to do with glorifying or honoring that in any way, and was instead a unambiguously good celebration of family and time of gratitude, why would we abolish that just because something has dark origins if it's turned into something beautiful? That fundamentally doesn't even make sense to me. And of course, it's not even actually the case to begin with. But I try to understand people's perspective. So even if I accept her false premise, the argument still doesn't hold for me.
And that's what the celebration, that's what they celebrated. I need y'all to get mad, okay? I do not celebrate. I have not celebrated for years. And then on top of that, not that anybody gives a about animals, but as an animal activist, I gotta speak the up. Celebrating genocide with the genocide of a whole species of animals? Weird.
So, I wasn't expecting the weird vegetarian twist in there. But setting aside the ethical debate over vegetarianism or veganism and all that, which is complicated, and I understand how people can reach those positions and viewpoints, words still do have meaning. And in the definition of genocide is that it's about people, not animals. You also, in a genocide, have to be targeting a people for destruction because of their basis of their identity or what group they belong to. Killing animals for food is not that in any way. So you can argue that meat eating in general is bad, but to uniquely villainize Thanksgiving or to suggest it's genocidal to eat turkeys on a holiday is unhinged and untrue.
I urge y'all to really look and just search up the true history of Thanksgiving from the Native Americans' perspective. Read as many different articles as you can. And then stop celebrating. Yes, disrupt the dinners.
Hold up. Disrupt them? What are they? Gonna pull a Just Stop Oil at Thanksgiving dinner and start screaming and ranting and glue themselves to the table? It's all just so strange.
Do not go to the fucking dinners. Do not, no. There's plenty of other things to do on any other day. You want to celebrate a day of gratitude, your family, pick another day, pick another name, pick another ritual, because, and even if it's Friendsgiving, it doesn't matter. You're celebrating the mass genocide of indigenous people, because this is the day, the way, the name, the settlers, the pilgrims, the English settlers did this. And so by doing what they did in the same way that they did, in the same name that they did, you were celebrating genocide no matter what you want to say about it.
Again, not true. And I love being told to like listen to the real history by people who have no idea what they're talking about.
Okay? I don't care about nobody's opinions. I don't care about anybody getting mad or being uncomfortable. I'm not here to make nobody comfortable.
Good, because if you were, it would not be working. You're making me concerned, not comfortable, but mostly concerned about you, babe.
Just like we do for any other fucking thing when it comes to fighting for justice of peoples, y'all need to educate and care about this. And I'm sorry. I know it's inconvenient because it's the day everybody has off and the day people get together, a day for food. I get it. It's comfortable. It's convenient. But that cannot be more important than justice, than fighting for bringing out the true history and the awareness of the true history of what this day is. That cannot be more important. Hello? Even if you're just American, you're not any type of brown, Hispanic, Indian, North or South Asian, anything. Even if you're just American, you are on the land where it began. This all was not our land. Just so y'all are aware. I need y'all to care. I need y'all to get mad. I need y'all to disrupt these things. I need y'all to spread the awareness. We cannot.
So this is why I think woke ideology is a form of brain rot. You have convinced yourself of an alternative fake history and then dedicated yourself to trying to destroying and disrupting an unambiguously positive day for almost all Americans in the name of some social justice crusade that would make no actual difference. Abolishing Thanksgiving wouldn't help any Native American's life be improved. It wouldn't solve a single one of the problems that exist on modern reservations where many people struggle with different issues and different disadvantages. It would accomplish literally nothing but robbing people of joy and happiness in the name of some symbolic woke victory. So in that, it really is a perfect encapsulation of everything that's wrong with modern social progressivism, especially on the internet. But what do you think? Are you convinced? Do you think Thanksgiving is problematic and needs to be done away with? I certainly don't, but you let me know what you think in the comments below. And now I'll wrap up today's show by reading a few of your comments from recent episodes. One person writes, "The gentle parenting woman would come off insulting to actual toddlers." Yeah, I agree with you. I don't know much about parenting, obviously, but I'm not even sure it would be good to speak to very young children that way. I mean, that condescending and yeah, it gives me the heebie-jeebies even just thinking about it. Another person says, "I identify as a squash, so stop calling me pumpkin." Yeah, I didn't like that. I didn't like being called pumpkin against my consent, but whatever, I guess. Another person writes, "Telling people to get a face tattoo to disappoint their dad for Thanksgiving is wild." Yeah, and her whole shtick was like, you be authentically you. But I'm like, if you're doing things to spite someone else and you're basing your own self-expression on other people, that's not really you being you, is it, pumpkin? Another person writes, "An interesting quote I heard recently. Capitalism is the uneven distribution of wealth, socialism is the even distribution of poverty, and communism is the even distribution of poverty with a gun to your head." Well, I actually think the gun to your head part also applies to socialism, because how else do they redistribute the wealth? And I would add to the capitalism part that it's also the growth and uneven distribution of wealth. Another person writes, "So I have a question. Is DEI just a generic idea, but it can be used for good and bad? For example, my company recently announced menopause leave for women having serious symptoms that are affecting their work. I'd consider this good DEI. What do you think, though? Can DEI be used for good or bad? Thanks, Brad." So I would say that DEI has different components, and I think the diversity element can be good if it just means making sure that your company or your school or whatever doesn't discriminate against anyone and is open to people of all perspectives and walks of life. And accommodations that allow different groups of people to succeed, like ramps for people in wheelchairs, isn't DEI in that sense that of this new movement that we object to. And I think what you're describing might fall under something like that. DEI is social justice initiatives that try to push some groups down to lift others up, or give blatantly unequal treatment in the name of progress, or rapidly accentuate identitarian differences in unnecessarily divisive ways. It's this concept of equity instead of equality. So not everything related to diversity or to just multiculturalism or pluralism is inherently what we mean by DEI when we say we disagree with DEI. Another person says, thanks, dear Brad, I've been trying to reach you. Have you seen or heard anything about how some Black people the day after the election actually got a text telling them they would be contacted about working on a cotton plantation? There are actual videos about this on YouTube, and I can attest to the guy who paid and still complained. I gave you a super thanks and you didn't read the super thanks comment. Oh, well, I'm sorry. I do try to read them all. Sometimes they slip through, so I do apologize if that happened. And yeah, I have seen those stories. Those are obviously troll texts that are really hateful and nasty. I have a hard time imagining, like, did anyone receive those texts? I know some gay people also got texts saying, report to the conversion camp. Like, did anyone really believe that that was real and get scared by it? Because you might be a little bit gullible if that happened. But of course, it's a very nasty thing to do. I can't believe people did that. Like, get a life. Another person writes, they'll probably just go about their business and help themselves to some extra stuffing. That really made me laugh, Brad. Happy Thanksgiving. I too will be eating way too much pie. Yeah, guys, I feel so bloated and today, but the desserts were so good. I must have had 5 times more dessert than actual food. Another person writes, I personally don't identify as left or right, and neither extreme sides like this. They demand full compliance to one side or the other. Yeah, preach. You're speaking my language, girl. She continues, this has made it very hard for me to find media to consume that doesn't shame me one way or the other. I've only recently found your channel, and I'm grateful to find someone who's objective and delivers content in such a way that it doesn't make me feel shamed and has caused me to, on a number of occasions, really explore and rethink my beliefs on some issues and be completely re-educated on others. I wish more viewers would find your channel from both sides to learn how to have an intelligent adult conversation about anything, not just politics. The far right and far left have taken over media and are completely alienating those of us that are in the middle. There are so many people and viewpoints in this country, and if we just took the time to have real conversations, we might find more middle ground that we share than we think, and that is what this country needs. This is how change happens. Well, thank you so much for your support and your message, and trust me, I relate to everything you're saying, and that's exactly what I'm trying to build and do here with this show and with this platform, so I'm glad that at least as far as you're concerned, it's working. Another person writes, herd immunity wouldn't have done much. COVID is not the flu. It's a SARS variant. It attacks of all places, the tongue, throat, and lungs, which had a very likely chance to leave permanent damage or cause life-threatening complications. All of that can happen before your body can learn anything. Mainstream media definitely failed to communicate that to the people, and it's easy to see why it was underestimated by most. Well, I know that there are some crazy stories, and some people have very long-lasting effects of COVID, but I do think what you're describing is incredibly rare. Basically, everyone I know has had COVID many times and had no lasting effects whatsoever. This comment continues, I have too many friends who thought they'd be fine without the vaccine and now live off to regret that decision because their sense of smell/taste is gone or their lung capacity has been greatly affected. Well, I'm sorry to hear that, although I'm not positive that the vaccine would have stopped that from happening because a lot of people still got COVID and still had symptoms from it. It only seems to reduce severe hospitalization rates and rates of death. Another comment says, in hindsight, I wish we had never done lockdowns. So many things have permanently changed. As a night shifter, there used to be a lot more stores open 24/7. All of the super Walmarts, and I had a Kroger and a McDonald's within 30 minutes that were open all night. Closest grocery store used to be 6 a.m. to midnight. Now it's 7 a.m. to 11 p.m. It was wonderful that I could do my grocery shopping and grab a Big Mac at 3 a.m. if the desire hit me. I'll never get that back. They should have just encouraged the vulnerable to stay home and let the rest of us live our lives. Yeah, I completely agree, and I'm sorry for your experience, but honestly, what you've described is the least of the sacrifices and disadvantages that came with lockdowns. The harm of locking people out of schools for years and the lifetime learning loss and earnings gaps that will exist from that, the number of small businesses that went bust and will never reopen, the number of people whose alcoholism or drug addiction was fueled by isolation and loneliness and lost their lives as a result. All of this is just tragic and irreparable and honestly innumerable as well. Difficult to even calculate the toll. So I think, I'm sorry about what happened for you and how it's affected you, but in another sense, you could be grateful that so many people had such more disastrous effects from it. All right, everybody, that's it for this episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Please do hit that like button before you go. Make sure you're subscribed. And don't forget to check out today's sponsor, Bono, at the link in the description or in the pinned comment. And remember to comment with your thoughts as well. I do read the comments and I pick a few to respond to in every episode. Plus, if you leave your comment with a super chat or a super thanks, I'll definitely respond to it on Monday, not tomorrow because it's the weekend, Monday's show. And we'll talk again next week.